Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Celine and today I thought I would do a little bit of a birthday book haul. So I turned 30 a couple of weeks ago, and before you say, oh, but you don't look 30, I'm aware of this. I still get carded sometimes when I try to buy paracetamol in the shop. And only a couple months ago, a person came to the door, looked at me and said, are your parents home? I have, however, been really on this planet for 30 years already. And I had a nice little celebration, and I celebrated it with friends and family, and they have all been very generous and have all given me books. So this video deserves to start with a blanket thank you for my partner, family, friends, everyone who has very generously given me some books. Books always make me really happy, so I'm absolutely thrilled to have all of these lovely books to add to my collection. The first book I got is Christine de Pizan, Life, Work, Legacy by Charlotte Cooper-Davies. I recently did a video about medieval women, and this book would have actually been absolutely perfect for that video. However, I didn't own this book yet at that point, so, you know, that's fine. Christine was born in 14th century Venice, and then very quickly she moved to Paris with her family. And she is a really prolific medieval writer. And particularly she oversaw a lot of literary production, so there are a lot of surviving copies of the manuscripts that she wrote. And you have to keep in mind, you know, this was 14th century, this is before the printing press made publishing a lot easier, so these are all handwritten manuscripts. And this book is both about sort of the production of Christine's books, so how she oversaw the production of them, sort of the book trade as it was in the 14th century in Paris, as well as about her works themselves, which are often seen as proto-feminist works. Now, I haven't read anything by Christine yet. I did start reading this book because it's just really fascinating to me, and I really look forward to finding out more about this really interesting medieval figure. Speaking of women doing cool things, I also have a book called The First Student, Maria van Schurman, written by Pieta van Beek. This is a Dutch book about the first female student, not just in the Netherlands, but also in the entirety of Europe, which was in 1636, I think. Yeah. So in 1636, Maria van Schurman attended Utrecht University, where she studied medicine, theology, humanities, all kinds of things. And she also wrote an essay about the rights of women to gain an education. This is such an interesting subject, and I think it really reminds me of some of the pieces Virginia Woolf wrote, supporting the right of women to actually gain an education, to actually join universities. It was quite a contested thing for several centuries, and I'm really interested to find out how she got into university and, you know, what role she played in this whole discussion. Reading about the subject of women in education and women's access to education is always really interesting to me, coming from, you know, a 21st century Western perspective. I'm always really aware of my own privilege, of the fact that I was just able to go to university, that I could do a bachelor's, master's, that I even did a PhD, and that there were no barriers for me to gain that education. And to see the massive struggle that a lot of women have had to fight for this right, that I basically just see as normal. Then I've got another Dutch book, which is The Reader of the 19th Century by Marita Mathijsen. This is a non-fiction book about the 19th century reader, so it looks, for example, at not just what people read, but also how they interacted with what they read, about reviews, about production of books, about where did people buy books. The entire culture around reading is the subject of this book, and I love books, as you might know, so this sounded really fascinating. I love reading about the 19th century because that's the century that I specialized in, and this sounds really good, and I also quite like the cover, so I'm very happy to have received this as a present. Moving into English literature, I also have Romantic Outlaws by Charlotte Gordon, which is a book about Mary Wollstonecraft and her daughter, Mary Shelley. This is a book that I've heard so much about. This is one of those non-fiction books that has made the rounds on booktube, and it just sounds amazing. A lot of people said that this is one of their favorite biographies and that it reads really quickly, even though this is a heavy book. There's a lot of content in this, But it does sound really fascinating. And I find both Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote a lot of feminist works, as well as Mary Shelley, who of course wrote Frankenstein. I think they're both really interesting figures. It's really tragic that they never really met as such, because Mary Wollstonecraft died very quickly after the birth of Mary Shelley. But I've heard that the way this is written really sort of contrasts their lives and teases out, various comparisons and that sort of thing. So I'm really looking forward to this one as well. Then moving back to the Netherlands, I also have A Life in Letters by the famous painter, who by English speakers is usually called Vincent van Gogh, which kind of offends me as a Dutch speaker. To me, this is Vincent van Gogh. I really quite like his paintings, and I have read a little bit of his correspondence with his brother, but not much, and I'm always fascinated by the lives of creatives and artists. I always love to know about their process, about their hopes and fears, their dreams, their nightmares. It's all great, it's all fascinating, and I look forward to diving into this massive book of his correspondence. Then moving to poetry, I also have If Not Winter, Fragments of Sappho, which is translated by Anne Carson. As you probably know, Sappho was a Greek poet, and she lived about 600 BC, around that time. And the vast majority of her poetry has only survived in fragments, so we don't have a lot of complete poems. Anne Carson has translated a lot of these fragments, and Anne Carson is herself a poet, which I think is wonderful. I think it's great for a poet to translate a poet, because I think there is a poetic sensibility that perhaps an academic, like a pure academic, someone who's not a poetry practitioner, might not have. So I've heard really wonderful things about this. It's quite a fun edition because it actually contains the Greek as well. So you might have the Greek on one page, the ancient Greek, and then the English translation. And it also shows, in terms of position on the page, like what parts of the sentence we have and where the gaps are, which I think is a really cool way of, presenting these fractured poems. I did take some ancient Greek in high school, but it's a long time ago. Like, I can read the alphabet still, but in terms of actual words, I don't think I remember enough of it to actually be able to read the ancient Greek. But it's still fun to have a look at the original, even if I probably won't understand very much of it. And I will just rely on Anne Carson to guide me through Sappho's poetry. Keeping in line with female poets, I also have Open Me Carefully, which is Emily Dickinson's intimate letters to Susan Huntington Dickinson, which is edited by Ellen Louise Hart and Martha Nell Smith. Now, Emily Dickinson is a poet who was a notorious recluse, so she didn't really leave her house for long stretches of time, but she was a very prolific poet. And a lot of her poetry was written in letters to people around her. She would make like little pamphlets, stuff like that. And this is a collection of poetry letters that she sent to her sister-in-law. Some people have posited that it might have been a romantic relationship, but I really look forward to finding out more about Emily Dickinson. I have read a small collection of her poetry, and I have to say I liked it. But I also felt like I was just grasping at straws. I was grasping at meanings, and I felt like she had like a whole image in her mind of what she was trying to convey, and I got the tiniest of snapshots. I hope that reading more about her, perhaps, diving into this correspondence, will help me understand her better as a poet. And then finally, in the poetry category, we have a contemporary poet, which is Mary Oliver's Devotions. I've read a collection of Mary Oliver before. I think it was called 1,000 Mornings, which I really enjoyed. Mary Oliver is, in a way, I think simplistic is definitely the wrong word, but her language is relatively deceptively simple. So it is very, very accessible. If you don't really get poetry, and I am one of those people, I think in general, I struggle to understand poetry, much more so than I don't struggle to understand prose in the same way. If that's you, if you are like me, then I think Mary Oliver is a great place to start. Her themes are usually centered around nature. I know she wrote a lot of poetry about her dog, and I find her poetical voice often very calming, very relaxing. So I look forward to diving into this collection of poetry and perhaps discover some more favourite poems for myself in Mary Oliver's work. Moving into Germany, I also have The Castle, or in German Das Schloss, by Franz Kafka. Kafka is a really unsettling writer. I read The Trial for my undergrad, and I have to say it was possibly the most disturbing experience reading a book that I've ever had. It was genuinely upsetting in a way that I had not expected. Like, I've read a ton of horror, especially as a child. I was quite morbid, so I really enjoyed horror. I wouldn't even consider The Trial a horror book, but the way it plays with perception, the way it unsettles reality, I just found so horrifying that I really struggled to actually finish the book. One of Kafka's other works, Metamorphosis, I find a lot less disturbing. It's about a man who turns into a bug, and it's a really interesting discussion about usefulness in society and about how if we can no longer work, we are basically seen as disgusting and other. This one is a work of Kafka that I don't actually know much about. This is not the book that most people talk about, which is definitely The Trial, I think. So I don't even know anything about the plot, so I'm just going to go in completely blind and either be horrified or be fascinated, and probably a combination of both. Then the other German book I have is Perfume by Patrick Suskind, and this is the German edition. I've already read this book. I've read it both in Dutch, I've read it in German. I don't think I've read it in English, but you know, that's fine. I've read enough editions of this. I also recently rewatched the movie. This is such a weird story. It sort of straddles speculative fiction and historical fiction in a way that I find really interesting. It's the story about a serial killer with an absolute sense of smell, so he can smell everything. He can smell where a stone has been, he can smell where, you know, anything, absolutely anything. Think a dog, but like 1,000 times better. And admittedly, it is quite a disturbing story, but I really enjoy it, so I look forward to rereading this probably for the third or fourth time. Then I also have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Now, I have to admit that my grounding in American literature is quite poor. There are so many American authors that I haven't read. Like, my studies have always been quite focused on British or European literature, so American literature is just something that has fallen by the wayside for me. To Kill a Mockingbird is an absolute classic that I look forward to reading. I feel like it's been a long time coming, and it's time that I read this. I also got The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. Eco is an Italian author, and this is a book that has also been turned into a movie, actually. I haven't seen the movie, I haven't read the book. I am simply just interested in the topic of the book. It's about a man who I think solves a murder in a medieval Italian abbey. So that sounds great. I've heard that Eco is a really fantastic writer. So yeah, sounds good. I really look forward to reading this. Another book by an Italian author that I got is If on a Winter's Night a Traveller by Italo Calvino. I've seen some other people read this book in the bookish community here on YouTube, and it sounds fascinating. This is a work of 20th century literary fiction, and from what I've heard of it, is very metafictional, and it has a sort of weaving narrative of various insights into storytelling, those kinds of themes. I found that really appealing. I also really like how the book begins. I'll read you the first sentence. So the first sentence reads, "You are about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveller. Relax, concentrate, dispel every other thought, let the world around you fade. Best to close the door, the TV is always on in the next room. Tell the others right away, no, I don't want to watch TV. Raise your voice, they won't hear you otherwise. I'm reading, I don't want to be disturbed. Maybe they haven't heard you with all that racket. Speak louder, yell, I'm beginning to read Italo Calvino's new novel. Or, if you prefer, don't say anything. Just hope they'll leave you alone." I really enjoy metafictional shenanigans, so I'm really looking forward to this one. Then I've also got this cute little book called Dinosaur Philosophy, which is written by James Stewart and illustrated by Kay Romay. I've seen some of these comics around on the internet, so I really look forward to, reading some more. I think this is the kind of book that I'm just going to put near my coffee table, and then whenever I have a moment, I'll just leaf through and read a couple of these comics. I also received this book as a gift, which is Kill Your Boss by Shane Coon. When my friend gave this to me, he said, "Oh yes, I know that you now have, a normal people job," which is how I called it. I told him like, "Oh yes, I now have a normal people job after finishing my PhD." And he was like, "This is what you need." I would like to put it out there that I have no intention of harming anyone at my workplace. However, this fiction book sounds quite fun. I think if I were to guess, I would say it's a humorous thriller. But I have no idea. I've only read the back and that wasn't particularly helpful. So I look forward to reading this. I also got The Housekeeper and the Professor, which is written by Yoko Ogawa and has been translated from the Japanese by Stephen Snyder. This is a book about a former maths professor, and he has had an accident and his memory has been impacted. And he only has about 80 minutes of memory, like active working memory. So whatever has happened yesterday, that's gone. Whatever happened this morning, that's also gone. And it's written from the perspective of his housekeeper. Every morning, the housekeeper has to reintroduce herself to the professor, and it talks about their relationship. It also talks a lot about math. It has strong themes about memory, about time, and I'm about halfway at the moment, so I will probably tell you what I thought of this book sometime soon. Then I also got this collection of Sermones Romani, which is a collection of Latin texts, and they have been lightly adapted, so it's not the pure original Latin texts, of a bunch of Latin authors. So I think there's Plautus, there's Cicero, there's some other people. Because I'm currently in the process of refreshing my Latin and perhaps learning more Latin than I ever actually studied in high school. And this is a book that I hope will help me along with the process of doing so. And then finally, the last thing that I got is this massive box set of Louis Couperus's books, which is a Dutch author. Couperus wrote in the 19th century, and I have read one of his books, which I really loved. So I really look forward to reading more of his works. And I also really like just having all of his works. Well, it's not actually all of his works, all of his major works in this really nice box set. The book of his that I think I will read next is this one. So I've taken it out of the box set. It is called Van oude mensen, de dingen die voorbij gaan, which translates into Of all people, the things that pass. I imagine that it might have been retitled in English, but I'm not entirely sure. If I were to compare Couperus to a British writer around the same time, I would probably compare him perhaps a bit to Dickens, even though they are very different writers. But I think Couperus also has a very strong class sensibility, has a very strong social sensibility. For example, the book that I read was about colonialism in Indonesia, which is a place that the Netherlands had colonies. And I thought he was very careful about describing those power relationships. I also think that he was, especially in that book, quite sympathetic towards his female characters, which I really enjoyed. So I really look forward to reading more of his works. I feel like so far I've really only dipped my toes into his work, so there's still a lot for me to explore. So those were all the books that I received for my birthday. I don't think I've ever received this many books for a birthday before. It was a big birthday and I did have a big party, so it makes sense. But I'm very, very thankful for everyone who has given me books, everyone who asked me which books I wanted, because I know it's slightly terrifying to just buy a book for me. A lot of these books were books from my wish list, so I do often provide the people in my life with a wish list, and they can go off it if they want, but just to help them along, because I own a lot of books, so especially for people who don't read much, I think it's terrifying to try to buy a book for me. They don't know if I own something already, or if I've read it and didn't like it, or something like that, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you're doing well, and I hope to see you again soon in some other video. Bye!